And after the missionary party, who then called themselves the Committee for Public Safety, spoke with Minister Stevens, said, land the American troops. He says, why should I land the American troops? Under what guise do I land the American troops? Well, you land them to protect American lives and property. Now that song keeps getting sung over and over again, most recently with Russia and the need to protect Russian lives and property and the movement into Crimea. Well, the Americans used the same excuse, and they landed the American troops on January 16, 1893. Actually, January 15, 1893. They landed the American troops and billeted them right across Iolani Palace. If you're familiar with Honolulu, on King Street, you have Iolani Palace, and right across that there's what we had known as the old federal building, the post office. At that time it was the Opera House. Now, the Americans had lived in a place called Nuuanu, where the stream, the freshwater stream, come down. Why are you going to have the Americans live in the Nuuanu area? Because you don't want to have to carry water for such a long distance. The fresh water is coming right down. They have all these homes in the Nuuanu area. But the Americans billeted their people right across Iolani Palace, because the next day, between the hours of about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, this Committee for Public Safety, who numbered 18, leaves the office of the law office of William O. Smith and begins to walk down the streets of Honolulu, separating into two groups. Because there's tension in Hawaii, the American troops have landed, have billeted themselves, and as they walk down towards Iolani Palace, they separate themselves, and then they gather at the back steps of, you know where the Kamehameha statue is at? This building is called Ali'iolani Hale. They gather at the back steps, and they convene themselves into what they call the new government of Hawaii, the provisional government. A person who had been an American citizen, had been in Hawaii for less than a year, begins to read a proclamation. His name is Mr. Cooper. He begins to read the proclamation that declares that we are now the government of the nation of Hawaii. We are provisional until terms of annexation can be arranged with the United States of America. As he is reading the proclamation, right across the street where the Americans are billeted, they walk across the street, circle this number, and declare that they recognize this government as the official government, while Liliuokalani is at Iolani Palace. Then they send a note to Liliuokalani: surrender. Surrender or face the wrath of the U.S. military who have just landed. Liliuokalani protests the landing, say you have no business coming into or landing in Hawaii. I have not given you that right, and according to all our treaties and by international law, you have no right to have done this. What is the response that comes from the U.S. military to this protest? You're right, silence. No response. Then this provisional government addresses Liliuokalani and threatens to do violence to her. She finally says, I yield my authority, not to the provisional government, but to the United States, who through force of arms have landed their American troops and have said that they will support this provisional government. Provisional government then takes control over Hawaii on the 17th of January, 1893. The next day, the 18th of January, 1893, they take the only ship that will sail from Hawaii to the United States. They prohibit any of the Queen's supporters from boarding that ship, and then they sail to the United States, so that on the 16th of February, 1893, less than a month, they have already arrived in Washington, D.C. They have negotiated, signed, and submitted a treaty of annexation of Hawaii to the United States of America. February 16, 1893. The thing is that in those days in the United States, presidents of the United States were not inaugurated in January, but it was in March. that they were inaugurated. So President Harrison tries to force the treaty into the Senate and get it approved immediately. Not enough time. In the meantime, Liliuokalani able to send her emissaries sneaking over to the United States, traveling as if they were businessmen. Then finally getting to Washington, D.C. New president comes into office, and that is Grover Cleveland. Cleveland hears the plea of the Queen's supporters, pulls the treaty out, and sends an investigator called Minister Blunt, B-L-O-U-N-T, to investigate the situation. Then on December 18, 1893, he addresses both houses of Congress, and he admits to all of the illegalities, the violation of international law, saying that we have no business coming into Hawaii, and I've tried to restore the Hawaiian government, but I am unable to. On one hand, these missionary party folks goes to Stevens and say, land the American troops on the grounds of protecting American lives and property. When he asks, whose lives, whose property? Ours, we are all American citizens. You are here to protect American lives and property. Now when Cleveland comes in and he directs his American citizens as President of the United States to restore the life of the land back to the Queen, they suddenly switch around and say, oh, you should mind your own business. We are not Americans. We're all Hawaiian citizens. So when the opportunity was otherwise, they changed their position. The president, however, Cleveland at this time, was not strong enough to be able to send troops into Hawaii because you had a lot of whites in Hawaii, and he was suffering from a divided Congress. The United States itself was in this great debate. How far should Manifest Destiny take the United States? Beyond the shores of California or not? Cleveland was against extending it, but a lot of people wanted to expand the U.S. Okay. So Cleveland unable to do it, but he says, as long as I am President of the United States, I would not resubmit the treaty into the U.S. Senate. Back at the ranch, back here in Hawaii, what do you have? You have a provisional government who is now being criticized for being an illegitimate government. They have no basis for declaring that they have the right to rule. What happened to this grand idea of a government by, for, and of the people? No vote taken, simply by force of arms supported by the American government. So Sanford Dole, who had been assigned himself as the head of the provisional government, says, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to get legitimacy in Hawaii. How do you get legitimacy? A constitution. Let's have a constitutional convention. How do I get a constitutional convention? Well, of course, you need delegates to a constitutional convention. Okay, that sounds pretty good. So I hereby declare a constitutional convention in which we shall have, 39 delegates? 37 delegates. And of the 37 delegates, because these Hawaiian people don't know how to exercise democracy, I shall appoint 19. And the other 18 shall be elected by the people. So he appoints 19 of his members as delegates to the Constitutional Convention. The other 18 to be elected by the Hawaiian people. But to leave nothing to chance, he said, before you can run for this office, before you can even vote in this election, you must sign a pledge, pledging your allegiance to the provisional government and disavowing any loyalty to Queen Liliuokalani. They go ahead, they hold their election, they convene, they adopt a constitution, and on the 4th of July, 1894, while the Americans are still left here in Hawaii, Sanford Dole descends the steps of Iolani Palace and declares that we have a new government called the Republic of Hawaii through the adoption or the ratification, not even ratification, through the completion of this Constitution. The Constitution says all of the lands of Hawaii now belong to the Republic of Hawaii. All the waters of Hawaii now belong to the Republic of Hawaii, and all the Hawaiian citizens are automatically citizens of this Republic of Hawaii. Okay? And are we going to put it to a vote for the people? Of course not. So merely by proclamation, Hawaii then switches to a so-called Republic of Hawaii. They wait 4 years until Cleveland gets out of office, and then when a new president comes in, President McKinley, they take this treaty, they submit to the United States, and ask the United States to ratify this treaty. All treaties must be approved by 2/3 of those present in the United States Senate. So they send it to the Senate for ratification. The Senate debates it, talks about it. The Hawaiian people gather around and they come out with what we call today the Ku'e petition, a monster petition in which 3/4 of the Hawaiian population signed a petition protesting the ratification by the Senate. They also sent a very eloquent memorial statement. And in that memorial statement they say that whereas we have believed that true governance can only be by, for, and with the approval of the people. And there has been no such vote taken by the people. But I tell you what, let us go ahead and take that vote, and we will agree to abide by the outcome of the vote. Let our people vote. They send a memorial statement to the Senate. The Senate hangs on, cannot decide. The Senate does not approve of this treaty. So out of the House of Representatives, Representative Newland submits what he calls a joint resolution of Congress. This is the logic. The U.S. Constitution requires that all treaties must be approved by 2/3 of those present in the Senate. But isn't it the case that 2 is more than 1? If we can get both houses of Congress to pass it by a mere majority, then we can say, hey, never mind about the constitutional requirement. We have a joint resolution of Congress to adopt this treaty. And so that's what happens. While the Senate is still hanging on to the treaty, which is a violation of the internal rules as well, the House of Representatives comes out with a resolution, a joint resolution of annexation of Hawaii. Hawaii has never been annexed by a treaty. It was only by joint resolution of Congress.
How do you make a joint resolution from one country and oppose it to another country?
You see, their argument,
Taking a traffic law, no speed on Broadway, and say now it applies to Colorado.
their argument is that the other party had already sent and signed the agreement, the treaty, and sent it to the Senate. So the Republic of Hawaii has already signed and sent it over to the United States. How the United States manages that second part, where you have two parties coming to an agreement, the United States uses a theory that, well, that's an internal or domestic matter within the United States. Never mind we violating our own constitution, but it's not the Hawaiians' kuleana. And that's the excuse they're using. Now, there are many arguments about, well, you never had authority to sign the treaty giving Hawaii away in the first place because of your illegitimacy. And how did you become so powerful? Because of the regime change that occurred through the support of the United States. Hawaii is the first regime change that the United States had fostered in the world. And following that, regime changes became a favorite pattern by which they would move ahead. And you find that occurring all over with Iraq and Afghanistan and the rest. Puppet governments created and signing agreements with its creator. Yeah. So that's what happened in Hawaii. Hawaii then becomes or said to be part of the United States. All of the lands, all of the waters of the government are ceded to the United States. That's why we have in Hawaii this whole controversy about stolen lands or ceded lands. Are they stolen or ceded? The other controversy that has not really hit is that they also took all of the Hawaiian citizens and made them American citizens. These are just as much ceded as the lands were ceded. The stolen people, the stolen lands, they fall in the same category. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says in one of its articles, you cannot arbitrarily take away or impose nationality upon anyone. The United States has done exactly that. I would suggest that as you read the Russian and the Crimean situation, and you make comparisons with what is happening there, you will find an interesting hypocrisy going on by the United States as well as by the Russians.
But they voted to become part of Russia again. But America's trying to deny them that the vote is coerced or something.
On that vote, and thank you for bringing that up, on that vote in Crimea, the American critique is, how can you hold a vote when your military is still in there? It's not a free and informed vote. Now, let's take a look at Hawaii. In 1959, after controlling Hawaii as a territory since 1900 all the way up to 1959, taking over our education system, taking away our language, taking over our consciousness, the continuity of our national consciousness, all gone. We didn't even know that we had been invaded by the Americans, etc. And then they say, okay, we're going to give you this vote, this self-determination. The question on the ballot, shall Hawaii be immediately admitted into the United States, into the Union of States of the United States? Yes or no? You vote yes, we become a state of the United States. You vote no, well, you just remain a territory. You know? Who were allowed to vote in that election? Of course, only the qualified voters. And only qualified voters were American citizens. So those who had that memory of who they were, that we were Hawaiian nationals, were not permitted. Of course, a lot of that memory was erased. But they also included the US military, who had been living in Hawaii for at least 1 year. So while in Crimea, the accusation is the Russians have no business leaving the military there, in Hawaii they allow the military to participate in the act of self-determination here in Hawaii. And then there was, and all during that period of time, there was no education about the right to independence. Yes, Brother Assad.
I think it's interesting. A few weeks ago, if any of you have been listening to Mr. Kerry profess to the world, Houston being handling himself in the 19th century mentality in the 20th century. If you were to put the Queen's face on Mr. Kerry, those exact same words, the way she handled herself magnanimously as she did. If you were to know the Queen's story, she said exactly that to the U.S. Congress. You have no authority in my country. And you know, it really boils down to understand the significance of how magnanimous that Queen was, our Queen was. She not only handled herself so dignified, in a dignified manner, she was flawless in her presentation and understanding international law beyond any multitudes of men, which insulted all the men because she was a woman, and especially a woman of color. That was our downfall. So if any one of you ever see the movie 12 Years a Slave, as I testified in the state capitol a few days ago concerning the annexation of Hawaii, let's give it a holiday of its own. First of all, it's wrong. It's never been annexed. So enough with your lies. And so for myself, it was quite insulting. But they're not listening to truth.
Okay, thank you, Brother Assad.
But it's amazing that when you understand Hawaii's history and truth, that must prevail.
I'm concerned about the time. I know I've been going on, and I can go on, but that may not be appropriate.
What I'd like to do is to collect the envelopes now and go over and get food for folks. So if you have envelopes, people that are gonna purchase lunch, I'll do my best to thank you, and then I'll put the change in the envelope. If you have any questions, see my authority. Excellent, excellent. Anyone else have envelopes?
Yes, Sylvia.
We might take a 10-minute break. and
Oh,
come
okay.
back, okay, and,
All right.
any envelope, I'll take it.
Would you like my
she was in prison for a time,
Yeah.
and she continually protested, and of course she passed on. Okay, so we'll take a 10-minute break. Is that what we'll do at this point? Okay?
Anyone else in the room? Anyone else in the room? I'll come back as quickly as I can. Leave the room on. You tell me something about 6 or 4, 12-inch tractors too. What kind of, hole cut? Anyone else in the room? Thank you. We'll take a break.
10 minutes past?
Oh, yeah.
We can just informally begin, and when more people come,
Yeah.
then
Dr. Barlow wanted a copy of all your
before we before we begin, are there any questions on some of the historical stuff or other avenues? Hi. What happened to what? Yeah. Yeah, looking at the current, yeah, yeah. A comment was made about, I guess, the present controversies that we have and how it relates back to the historical events that have occurred. And I think that's going to be a matter of unfolding as we go into the process of decolonization and reestablish our own government. That will be a continuing question that we have. I want to share a story. Before I begin, Pua, you want to say anything at this point? No? Okay. I want to share a story that Pua and I had experienced when we were both studying with Auntie Pilahi Waki. And in our sessions with her, we would sit with her at her home in Kailua until late in the mornings, like maybe 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and just sitting, and at times the lights would be left off and just her talking and sharing that information, her information with us. Pua, who had been active in actually the leadership of the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana. Kaho'olawe is an island among the larger islands here in Hawaii, in which the United States military had been using as a bombing target site. Very similar to what happened in Vieques in the Puerto Rico, and in Micronesia, the Bikini Atolls and others like that. But they had been using the island of Kaho'olawe. Pua had been, as part of the movement to stop the bombing of Kaho'olawe, and had been on the island, and they were constructing a halau. And so Pua said, look, we already put the first post in the ground. What we are wondering is that where do we put the second post? Do we face the east? Do we check out the winds, perhaps according to the sunlight as it comes in the morning, but yet the sun comes in different directions, general directions differently. So how would our ancestors have placed the second post? Pilahi says, "Ovai oi, who are you?" And so Pua is kind of caught by this response. So he says, I am Puanani. And so Auntie Pilahi says, are you not the descendant of your ancestors? Yeah. Do you not have eyes like your ancestors? Do you not have the opportunity to touch, to smell, to feel, all of the same things that your ancestors had? And she says, yeah. And she says, Auntie Pilahi says, why are you trying to replicate what your ancestors did? What they actually did was respond to the very same thing that you yourself had. So it's not a question of, well, if it was done or if it was part of the tradition or the culture, then we need to repeat what had been done. But as we lead ourselves into the future, we ourselves have to take all of the information in that is available, and yet, in the end, make our own minds. She would also teach that there are many different aspects of Hawaiian religion. Yeah, different people, different opinions. Some want to worship Pele, some want to worship Kane, Ku, Kanaloa, whatever it is. But she says, it is, hi Judy, it is my opinion that there is some fundamental religion in Hawaii that predates the more modern religion who we see as the Ti'i or the Tikis or the structures or the common idea of the four gods and then the Aumakua and all of the others. And she said that the religion is actually contained in the language. It is contained in the power of words. You know, some Hawaiians would say, be careful with your words because the words have the power to kill, has the power to heal, has the power to create, has the power to destroy. And what she would say is that, but people don't know the structure, the technique of the words themselves, the power of words. She says it's very simple, very basic. Normally we hear the sounds of vowels, a, e, I, o, u. But she says each of the sound that man makes affects the universal forces. Ah, was the sound of life. The sun, la. Anything sun touches, you will have life. A is the sound for the air, for the representation of time. You cannot touch time, you cannot touch air. But when it manifests itself, it is undeniable. When winds decide to move, nothing is going to stop the winds. When time moves and then you realize that I'm bald-headed now,